Hi everybody, it's a good afternoon. Thanks for joining. I'm Jared, I'm the founder of PeopleBunch and I'll be hosting today, and I'll get straight to the point. What we're seeing right now is a lot of settings are thinking they're prepared, but when it comes down to it, when the inspection is round the corner, they're still relying on paperwork assumptions. They're not clear, they're not ready, they don't have it all the evidence together yet. And that's where people are getting caught out. So Ofsted have, as we all know, have shifted from the one-word judgment. It's about how well we actually understand our settings and how confident you are that you can evidence it under pressure. So can you clearly explain right now where you're strong, where you're not, and back that up with evidence on the spot? Because that's where it's getting a bit interesting. And the reality is most settings are doing really, really good stuff, and they're just missing out on this bit of organization. At PeopleBunch, we've built a software solution that would help you with that. It gives you full oversight, all the KPIs, helps the SLT team. So what we thought, instead of now, we want to give you the practical information, not theory anymore, the practical information with Nazia, an actual practicing Ofsted inspector and consultant. So you're hearing it directly from someone who's doing inspections right now and seeing what's actually happening with leaders and with companies. Alongside this, we have Sarah, and she will also show you how you can look after your data, look after your information, make sure it's all ready for your inspection using the toolkit. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to Nazia. Hey, Nazia.
Hello, hi Jared. Thank you, Jared. And thank you for inviting me to talk about the inspection process. So my name's Nazia, and I've been inspecting under the new framework. I'm a consultant for school improvement as well. So what I'm going to talk to you about is what happens to the run-up to an inspection, what they're looking for, and then the key kind of hit home kind of core recommendations and suggestions from me to you, and things you should be wary of as leaders working within your settings, whether they're early years or schools. So we know that the inspection framework has changed, and that is as a result of the big listen that took place, where Ofsted asked for views across a range of settings, including training providers, early years, schools, social care, and as a result of that, Ofsted introduced a new inspection framework in November 2025. Now, from November 2025, there were a number of settings that took part in the pilot. So HMIs were responsible for leading those inspections, and those involved in the pilot were kind of given a bit of leeway around the inspection process, and it was also a learning process for Ofsted themselves in terms of how best to conduct those inspections. So there was a pilot with testing. From that point onwards, all inspections, all Ofsted inspections then became live from January 2026. So from January 2026, contracted Ofsted inspectors like myself were then involved in the inspection process. Now, we know previously all inspections were based on single word judgments: requires improvement, good, outstanding, and inadequate. Now, these judgments were made across 4 areas, and it was across quality of education, behavior and attitude, personal development, leadership, management. So while these were helpful at a high level, these judgments didn't really provide much diagnostic detail to identify specific strengths, specific areas of development. They were quite generic, and the reports themselves were quite short. around 2.5 pages long, I believe. And from my perspective, any educational setting, regardless of how big or small you are, educational settings are complex organizations, and judging them across 4 broad areas just was never sufficient. So the new toolkit has now, it's actually, I believe, and my personal opinion is the new toolkit is actually quite good. It has a 5-point scale, and it has a report card approach. So at the end of the inspection, you're provided with a report card. It shifts the focus onto 7 evaluation areas for early year settings, and 7 to 8 for school settings. It focuses on evidence-based leadership, inclusion, and safeguarding. So those are the golden threads running through every single area. And now, instead of the word judgments, they've moved on to the word gradings. And those gradings are urgent improvement, needs attention, expected standard, strong standard, and exceptional standard. Now, this enables inspectors to assess settings in a more structured way. And for leaders, the toolkit is actually a really good way for you to better understand your setting and how to improve it, and to evidence all the great things that are happening in your settings, because Ofsted really do stick to the points, the standards within each area. In fact, they actually carry, a lot of the times the inspectors carry the toolkit around with them, because when they're meeting with leaders, they may ask questions directly from the toolkit. It's like walking around with the Bible, you know? So onto the process. An important part of the inspection happens when before actually inspectors even arrive on site. So inspectors conduct a pre-inspection phone call with the setting leader, and that's normally now a video call. That's the recommendation for lead inspectors, to do a video call. And depending on the size of your setting, it can last anything from less than an hour to up to 2 hours. And this is normally done with the senior leader or with management of the setting, and potentially even the nominee. Now, the nominee is someone that is working within the organization that the management have decided will represent them through the process. Now, during this call, it's about gathering what Ofsted call the big picture and setting the tone for the inspection ahead. So the call consists of an introduction, they discuss practicalities, they want to get a better understanding of your settings context, and there's an element of planning the timetable for the inspection. So the planning call is actually a top-level view in readiness for the initial evidence gathering that inspectors will do when they come to your setting. They will ask questions about the context of the setting. They'll ask questions about governance, pupils on roll, SEND provision, staff training. So some key questions they may ask is, talk to me about the context of your setting. What are your current strengths? What areas have you identified for development, and what actions have you taken to improve your setting and improve the provision within your setting? And this conversation is quite important because it forms a foundation for the inspection and those inspection activities that will take place moving forward. The inspection focus on the impact of the systems and processes that leaders use to support the continuous improvement and effective running of the setting. So this is what we're actually looking for. Inspectors collect first-hand evidence. So we want to see it in action of how the setting typically operates. The word typically being really, really kind of important in through the inspection process, mainly through professional conversations and observing, and through reviewing specific documentations from a compliance perspective as well. What inspectors want to see is the day-to-day work that you do in action. There's no specific format that Ofsted or inspectors recommend. We're not allowed to. There's no specific pedagogical practice that Ofsted recommend. There's no specific change management system or leadership structure that Ofsted recommend. It's down to you and what works for you. And the only thing inspectors really look for is why, how does this work? Why is this relevant? What impact is this having in your setting? And, how is this going to help you get better and improve? And how does this help you address the priorities? Yeah. So those are the kind of queries that come from inspectors. So when they arrive, they assess what they assess based on the observations, okay, and based on what you as leaders have presented to the inspector. So we're coming in with this big picture that you have presented, and this is where setting the tone takes place. So when inspectors walk in, there's that kind of in-person meeting, and it starts straight away from the moment we walk through those doors. Literally, any inspection, just be wary. The minute the inspectors drive up, park up wherever they're parking up, and walk through those doors is the inspection activity starting. Throughout the inspection, inspectors work with leaders to build an accurate view of the quality of your setting. And so this includes knowing and understanding how well your children achieve. So that means develop the knowledge, skills, and confidence they need. How well they belong. So how well they feel safe, welcomed, valued, and how well they thrive. So do these children benefit from the right systems, processes, and levels of oversight that enable them to flourish, regardless of their background, regardless of the individual needs? Achieve, belong, thrive. Those are the three things inspectors look for. The expected standard in each evaluation area in the toolkit is the starting point for Ofsted's thinking and what they are looking for, which is typicality. We know day by day, different things happen, situations might change, pupils and young children may behave in a way that is not normal, especially if there's strangers coming into school or into your setting. Whatever it is, we inspectors understand things can look different on the day. That's fine. We inspectors understand that. What we're looking for is the typicality element, and that typicality element is triangulated not just by speaking to the adults, but it's talking to the children, listening to the children, observing the children, talking to parents, or gaining parent views at the school gates possibly, or it may be through documentation. So the word typicality really and actually specifically refers to, is this normal for this setting? Is this the case for everyone? And that's what typicality means for inspectors. And the word expected, again, so this is another thing that actually does come up, because all inspections, when they take place in the same way under the old framework, all inspections, the starting point for those inspections was good. We used to look at good, and we used to get that best fit for good. It's quite similar for expected. So inspectors always start from expected. So any kind of evidence gathering is done, the expected standard is the first one that is looked at. Expected is not a low bar. It is actually more rigorous than the previous good rating. And recently in inspections, school leaders have actually pushed back on the word expected because of how it sounds and how it may be interpreted. However, expected represents high quality, effective settings that meet all required benchmarks and compliance. So it's quite a high bar. And that is something we just have to as school leaders, as early years setting managers and leaders, it's just something that you have to accept, and we all have to accept. So what happens? Inspection activities take place. Then there is an opportunity for reflection. So during these reflection meetings, this is an opportunity to have conversations with the managers, to reflect on the evidence, make sure that the grades reflect the evidence gathered. It's an opportunity to just share our thoughts on where we think we're going with the inspections, on meeting those inspection standards, but also where we're going in terms of the amount of evidence we've gathered for any activity, and whether more evidence is needed for one area compared to one area within the toolkit versus another. And it enables us to discuss what we need to explore further based on that information. In that reflection meeting, when we talk about, we do open up the toolkit is opened up, and the discussion that ensues is around this idea of secure fit. And leaders generally want clarification around what secure fit means, and it's really important that this is understood. Under the previous model, it was about best fit. So elements may be missing from the setting. However, if it's not, if it kind of generally, the word generally was quite important under the old toolkit. If it generally kind of meets that criteria, then it's good. However, under this new framework, it's not about best fit. It's not about perfect fit. It's about secure fit, which means, is there sufficient, reliable, and coherent evidence that the standard is being met in practice and working effectively? So even if some aspects, so some standards within that area, the work is still developing, this is recognized through the inspection, and inspectors actually what they want to see is there planning in place to make sure that those areas will be met. So when it comes to any kind of discussions, especially during those inspections, and when it comes to any kind of inspection activity, we don't expect leaders to have the information ready at hand right there and then, because you've got time, you've got a few hours, you've got the afternoon, you've got the morning, there may even be a second day depending on how big the setting is. There is time for you to gather your evidence, pull it together, take it and bring it to the table. However, those reflection meetings are the perfect time for inspectors to give indicative grades. And this is precisely what happens when those reflection meetings take place. The toolkit is opened up. Every single one of those standards is discussed within the toolkit in the expected standard. If all of those standards within the expected area are met, then the strong standard is looked at. And then you work your way through that. If only part of the strong standards are met, the indicative grade remains expected unless all the strong standards are met securely. So therefore, that discussion, that evidence gathering is still ongoing, because undoubtedly leaders want to make sure that they have presented all the evidence so that inspectors can pull that into their evidence base. Previously, under inspections, the evidence base used to close by a particular time. So by around midday, or there used to be some kind of indication during the day in terms of when the evidence book will close and the evaluations will be made. Under the new toolkit, that evidence book actually remains open. So there's the opportunity through the reflection meetings for you as leaders to hear, they need this, they didn't find this, they didn't find evidence for this, oh, they found evidence for this, great. It enables you as leaders to really think deeply around, okay, how are we going to showcase more of XYZ, because they haven't seen it. Safeguarding. So moving on to some of the key elements. Safeguarding is now judged we know is judged separately and always has been judged separately, and it's simply met or not met. So, and that is normally conducted, if there's additional inspectors, that is normally done by the lead inspector. So the lead inspector, who is normally a HMI or an ex-HMI, will be judging safeguarding from a compliance perspective. But the other inspectors will be looking at safeguarding from a practical perspective, from a day-to-day perspective. So has safeguarding been clearly understood? Is it implemented? How is it overseen by leadership? That's really critical aspect of the safeguarding standard. And then we move on to the other two areas, which are really, really important. So the first one is leadership. And this is judged through the leadership and governance area. Do leaders clearly understand their provision? Do they take staff well-being into account? Have they created a culture of continual improvement? Do they engage with stakeholders? And if so, how do they engage with stakeholders? And then following on from that is around governance. What kind of part does governance play in the structure and the school improvement process? Do they have knowledge and understanding of their statutory responsibility? Then you have and so safeguarding, we know, runs throughout. So safeguarding culture, whether it's understood by all, embedded through the system. Then like I said, you have your leadership and governance. The third area that is a golden thread that runs through every single strand is inclusion. And we know that it really is linked to that overall objective around sense of belonging and pupils flourishing. Inclusion has to exist in order for pupils to feel that sense of belonging and children to flourish. So the inclusion aspect really focuses on, does every single child, regardless of background and regardless of ability, are they supported? Are they treated equally? And are the best outcomes being achieved for those young people? Sir Martin Lawrence, who's the chief inspector, he's got this phrase that he uses, and it's used in almost every training that inspectors do, which is, if you get it right for the most vulnerable, you get it right for everyone. And it's kind of like a motto. And this is why inclusion is so important, because it's really about identifying barriers to education. So what are you as leaders doing to identify those barriers? How are you ensuring that your children's needs are met? How are you securing progress in line with their peers? And case sampling in this case may take place. So that provides an ideal opportunity for leaders to talk about specific pupils, and for us as inspectors to explore a pupil's experience of education in your setting. This is like my final kind of words I would say, is that there's the inspections, we know it, and this is information that's in the operating guide. So you've got your toolkit, which is kind of like your reference point in terms of all the kind of requirements, compliance and benchmarks that you need to meet as settings. And then you have your operating guide, and the operating guide really talks about how an inspection will be conducted. And it's really handy to have that, because then you kind of have an awareness of what will be taking place. I've summarized the whole operating guide in just these last few minutes, but actually it's a little bit more hefty, and so it's definitely worth reading. within the operating guide, it talks about how often inspections take place. So now if the setting has expected grading, it's every 4 years. If they have a needs attention grading, it's every 12 months, sorry. And if it's urgent improvement, there's a grading or inspection grading after 6 months. So that is generally how the timeframes they work with. But again, it is very much dependent on, what's happening nationally and locally. So we know that due to COVID, a lot of inspections are behind. So the ideal situation would be that Ofsted sticks to those timeframes, but there may be a bit of leeway there. Again, like I said, it just depends what's going on. So you as leaders, you need to be confident in what's happening in your provision. You need to know on a day-by-day basis what's happening, what's going on with certain pupils, what does the quality of education look like? Do my staff know my pupils? Are we doing the best we can for them? Are we sticking to that expected standard? Because that is what you need to be looking at, the expected standard, and making sure you're hitting every single one of those marks there. Do you have clarity around what you need to be working on? And making sure that you are really on top of it in terms of being able to evidence it on the day during the inspection process. Okay, and that was a quick summary of quite a hefty kind of process, but also a lot of information there. So I hope you guys found that useful. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have some bits that I would like to question based on what you just said. So you mentioned case sampling. What's case sampling?
So case sampling is when what we really want to do is, part and parcel of the process is, like I said, is around understanding what a child's perspective is. So one of the things like inspectors may do is talk to children, observe them, sit with them while they're reading, maybe, yeah? Listen to conversations that children are having between themselves. So they may just be observing those conversations. The other element of that is the experience a child is having. So if there is a child who's disadvantaged, is from one of the vulnerable groups, so either disadvantaged from pupil premium background, has a SEND background, or has some kind of SEND needs, or has an EHCP, case sampling involves using, gathering information about that child, so understanding the context of that child, and then seeing what is in place to ensure that that young person's needs are being met, that child's needs are being met. So the case sampling involves about, depending on the size of the setting, up to 6 children. And specifically, the HMI or the lead inspector will say, based on, again, the cohort of students within your setting, they may say, we'll want a child who is from a disadvantaged background, we want 2 children who are from, who have got SEND needs, or we would like a child from, I don't know, the early years reception class, or a child from Key Stage 1. So they're very, very specific around these pupils. And the leaders are expected to give the list of pupils that fit that criteria. The inspectors will choose with the leaders who they will observe. And part and parcel of that observation is looking at the paperwork linked to that child as well. So it's about looking at if the child has got a support plan in place, a SEND support plan. They will look at that support plan, and they will look at all of the things that are within the provision that the setting should be providing. And then the inspector would want to go and see that in action. So if it says in the setting, if it says the provision is that this child will be provided with a, I don't know, a trusted adult or a safe space to go if they're feeling dysregulated, the inspector would want to see that in action to verify that that safe space exists for that child.
So it sounds like all vulnerable children will more than likely be part of this case sampling cohort for the inspection.
It tends to be vulnerable for anyone from vulnerable groups. We wouldn't, so it would be EAL learners, for example, disadvantaged, and SEND, and
So
anyone who have got social care involvement.
Is that list created in the pre-assessment, the pre-visit?
No, it's on the day, yeah. In the morning, it normally takes around 15 to 20 minutes. The leaders are provided with information prior to the inspection. So when the inspectors do arrive the following day, they are given the list and that selection is made through that kind of initial meeting with the leaders.
Do we need to know the stats for obesity rates or anything like that in our local areas?
What you need to know in terms of for your local areas is contextual safeguarding. You do need to know context. Not obesity rates. There's nothing in the toolkit which talks about that, but what I would recommend is going through the toolkit and really looking at the expected standard to see what is each standard saying. So you have your area, the area being safeguarding, leadership and governance, or inclusion, or curriculum teaching, and within the expected, each of those points are called standards, and working your way through those standards. So in terms of context, if we're talking about context perspective, they'd want to know how many pupils are on the SEND register, how many pupils are have got social care involvement, a gender ratio, all the usual things that you would expect, but nothing beyond that, unless, like I said, when it comes to contextual safeguarding, then yeah, that would be important.
So of course we've got a bit of documentation, we've got the toolkit, but when it comes to the outcomes to child, does that affect things here? So if we forget to put something down in the toolkit, will that be looked down upon, or would the outcomes to child be add to the outcome instead?
So if we're talking about any specific point within the toolkit, so let me see if I can find one under inclusion. I've got it open over here. So let's say there's something here which talks about leaders having, let's say, leaders taking a graduated approach to identifying needs, and practitioners receive suitable training and support to implement this approach. Now, if for example, for that specific point, let's say that generally the graduated approach, typically the graduated approach is being used because there's a SENCO in place, and the SENCO is working with the teachers or with the teaching assistants, and has a plan in place to make sure that the graduated approach is being implemented. So they've done some quality assurance around that, yeah, and that there is evidence through the documentation that those plans are being updated based on the needs of those pupils that have been identified. Yeah, so there's some gathered evidence and there's some QA around that may be useful in that situation. But the second part of that point is practitioners receive suitable training to support and implement this approach. Now, you may have some long-standing teachers who are using that approach really, really well. But at the same time, you may have some teachers who are early on in their career. And so therefore, they are in the early stages of using that graduated approach. That doesn't mean that that standard hasn't been met. The weight of that point, that practitioners receive suitable training, could be that the SENCO has then provided a training program to us, to the inspectors, a CPD program, and said, yeah, so this is our plan to support any new recruits, any new teachers, any teaching assistants. And this is a plan that we're working through. And we know that this works for our staff. That in itself would be sufficient, especially if we know that the graduated approach, we've seen it in action and it's having the positive impact on the pupils. So therefore, that standard would be considered expected if we have the evidence that we've seen the graduated approach in action, we've seen the positive impact on outcomes for the pupils, and we know that even though leaders there may be some new teachers there that may not have necessarily gone through the training, but there are plans in place for them to receive that training. And the teachers that are there have received training. That in itself gives us sufficient evidence to say, yep, that has been met. So therefore, each sentence in a way is slightly weighted, you know, based on the evidence that is collected.
Okay. Is there a particular reason why Ofsted aren't looking at the high performing children and basing everything on the lower end?
Sorry, I don't understand. Sorry. Could you repeat that question?
We have a person who's asked a question. Why not look at the high performing children? It seems like we're looking at children with challenging needs and needs improvement and vulnerable children. Why are we not looking through the full spectrum? I mean, that might be a question for a CEO, but
so
you might.
It's a simple response actually. The simple response is that who are the most vulnerable pupils? Who are the pupils that are likely to not achieve well? Who are the pupils whose gaps in learning lead to issues for later on in their educational journey? So when it comes to those pupils who are already doing really, really well, they're doing well. That's brilliant. And actually, it's important for inspectors to see achievement of those that are doing well and you know how far they're going, the stretch and challenge attached to those high achieving pupils. But like we said, the motto is, if you get it right for the most vulnerable, you get it right for everyone. So if we know that actually those pupils that are the most vulnerable, are the most disadvantaged, are getting the best deal, then automatically as a result of that, the high achievings are already getting the best deal to achieve their potential.
Got you. So one thing I would like to ask before I get to the next section is, so you mentioned the reflective meetings. So in the reflective meetings, there is a scenario. So I guess if you could just give us it practically. So if they've gone into the meeting, are you given a glimpse of what the outcomes might be, and then they have an opportunity to enhance that?
Yeah. So in the reflection meetings, the leaders tend to be observers. So they are observing the discussion between the inspectors, depending on the number of inspectors. Now, in some settings, there may only be one inspector. If that is the case, then that lead inspector is presenting the evidence that they've collated. So that's one part of that reflection process. The second part of that reflection meeting is the leaders querying, questioning, possibly even challenging the inspectors, querying the evidence that's been collected, speaking to leaders around, you know, why they feel why they've made that evaluation, for example. So there may be some element of discussion there. Sometimes it's even like, actually, we agree, that is accurate representation of what happens here on a day-by-day basis. Then the third element of that reflection meeting is opening up the toolkit and actually talking through the expected standard to say, and providing kind of indicative grades. So it's saying, you know what, you are likely to meet this top standard. Second point, not so much. And that conversation then leads to further discussion around what other inspection activities do we need to do to make sure we can evidence that second bit or the third bit that isn't fully met.
So in that case, what I'm hearing is you could come in and say, it might seem like expected, or maybe needs attention. And this is an opportunity for the provider to actually say, well, have you seen X? Have you seen Y?
Mm-hmm.
And in that scenario, Ofsted will have to go and have a look and reevaluate. Yeah.
Because the reflection meeting is actually meant to be a collaborative process. It's like, you know what, actually, that's not accurate evaluation. We would really love for you to come and see this, or look at this piece of work that we've done around, I don't know, evidence-informed practices or whatever, right? So if they say that, it'll be a case of, okay, yeah, let's do this, and so it really is a collaborative process. That's my feeling and my experience of it.
And if someone grades themselves as expected, let's say, in their toolkit, is there an opportunity that actually Ofsted would say, no, I don't agree with that, you're going to be up 1 or up 2 even? Does that happen?
There's been inspections whereby the initial grading, the self-grading that the setting may have done is expected, but actually we've gone and say, you're strong, you are securely, inspectors have said you're securely meeting strong, you are strong. But then there's also been the opposite, whereby you've set yourself as expected, but actually there's at least 3 things there that you're not meeting in terms of expected. So unless you can provide us with evidence, I'm afraid we're going to have to look at needs attention. So yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. So we've gone past our time slot. So thank you, Sarah, for being patient with us. Thank you, Nazia. So Sarah, if I could hand over to you to show us the toolkit in action.
Yep, sure, not a problem. Right, I'm just going to share my screen. So here is what the Ofsted toolkit looks like on PeopleBunch. As you can see, you've got all of the standards here and the gradings here. We have all the sections here, the 7 sections that are in the toolkit. You open each section up as you go along, like this. The guidance is here. So for safeguarding, as Nazia said, it's simply met or not met. And then you grade yourself against each area. So whatever is on the toolkit has been put onto the platform, and you can go through each section. You can also add your evidence as well. So I've got evidence here. I've got a policy uploaded here. Obviously, evidence can be added as a video, a document, a photo, whatever kind of evidence you want to add, you can add here. To add your evidence, you simply click evidence, you can upload new, or you can cross-reference and add existing evidence across different areas of the toolkit as well. As you can see, that's all your safeguarding there. And then we've got our inclusion here. Again, the detailed guidance is here. So all of the gradings are here. And then you can open up each section just like any other and add your evidence and put your grading here. And then at the very bottom of the toolkit, we have all of the evidence here. So as you can see, you can use the toolkit in a very easy way. It's all in one place and it's easy to access. Should you go into one of those meetings and there's not enough evidence to support an area, if it's on the toolkit here, it's easy to access and you'll know where everything is. For one example, if I open up the safeguarding and I go to the safe recruitment area here, leaders receive training in safe recruitment, understand and follow recruitment practices. You could upload your uploaded here is the sorry, not it there, that's the safeguarding thing. Here is the single central record has been uploaded here. If we go to our people section in PeopleBunch here, and our dashboard here, it gives you a RAG rating to tell you what needs to be done for your safer recruitment. So here you get a warning that if training is about to expire and DBS updates have to be checked, for example, and then everything's okay here. As you're doing the onboarding process for staff, it will be red, and as you go through each part of safer recruitment, it will show up that you've completed it. So that gives you an idea of the dashboard and what PeopleBunch can do for you with regards to the toolkit.
Thank you for that. So at the moment, I know most people would do it on the grading with a highlighter. Is that what you're seeing, Nazia, when you go?
What we're finding is in settings are just using a wide variety of ways of evidencing, and like I said, there is no set way that is recommended. So what I find is, you know, the quickest, if you can get the information to us quickly prior to reflection meetings, it adds to the evidence base. It makes that reflection meeting richer because we're not searching for the evidence. It's there, it's present. In the same way, when there's good practice happening, it's there, it's present. We can comment on it right there and then. So in that same way, when there's any kind of evidence, if it's there, present, embedded, and we can evidence it straight away into our evidence base, that reflection meeting and that collaborative process becomes a lot more richer, a lot more useful for the leaders.
Sarah, how are you finding it? How are people finding the toolkit at the moment? Is that happening?
Yeah, they're finding it really useful because you can go through each section, you can see what's been completed, what hasn't been completed, and it highlights really easily what areas need to be worked on, because it gives you you get the progress bar, and it will show you, you know, what's okay and what's not okay. And, you know, the toolkit is meant to be a working document that's used between inspections. So if you grade yourself as expected, but then you review sort of like 6 months time, you may move up to strong, and you can add additional evidence, and you can show that story on the toolkit to see how you've moved yourself from expected to strong. So that's one benefit of doing the toolkit using PeopleBunch. Thank
you, Sarah. That is going to be us for today. Thank you so much, Nazia. Thank you so much, Sarah. I really hope all of you found this really useful, and thank you so much for finding the time to attend. Thank you all. Bye-bye.